In the sky above, in front of the divine tree of comprehension, all eyes were gazing down at Yi Futian. In the sky above, in front of the divine tree of comprehension, all eyes were gazing down at Yi Futian. This sword strike, indeed, qualified him to meditate before the divine tree and obtain the fruit of the way. However, Yi Futian had come late. Lu Qingyao's eyes were indifferent. A ray of cold air drifted out from her, and a young man not far from her looked at her and asked, "Is this the person who robbed Junior's sister Spring of Life?" Lu Qingyao nodded, and swiftly, several disciples of the divine palace stared at that figure. This time, a number of outstanding figures had converged from each of the top principalities. Gai Shishir of the Golden Divine Nation was extraordinary in strength and was extremely arrogant. He was unwilling to enter the divine palace to cultivate, but his combat power was not any less than its direct disciples. Of all the direct disciples here, none had the confidence that they would overcome Gai Shishir. Qinzong was of the Sky-Burying God clan. His attack power was equally as powerful, and he was unmatched. And now this swordsman who came from Taishan Mountain seemed to be very strong. Moreover, he claimed to be a musician of Taishan Mountain. Yet his one sword strike was able to thrash all the cultivators of the divine capital of Xiling, including the son of old demon Luo Yuming. And what was really wild was this man dared to raid the disciple of the divine palace and filch the fountain of life and the fruits of the way on their home territory. It was truly unimaginable. Gai Shishir and his cohort also looked at Yi Futian. On the day of the Battle of Taishan Mountain, Gai Shishir had been present and witnessed the sword that defeated the disciples of the divine capital of Xiling, which caused great embarrassment to the cultivators of divine capital of Xiling. At the time, many thought that there had been a Runhuang secretly aiding, but now it appeared that it was the young man before them, that inconspicuous musician Shenjing. Furthermore, his sword method of the fleeting divine sword had far exceeded that of Wan Shiyi. Therefore, was it possible that he was the disciple hidden by Lord Taishan? Lord Taishan claimed that he would not accept any more direct disciples. He had been unwilling to accept Gai Shishir as a disciple, but now it seemed to all be an excuse. It was likely that Lord Taishan had already had a disciple, but had not publicized it. So, was this the reason why Lord Taishan was unwilling to accept him? If it was a competition of swords, then Shenjing indeed was more suitable than him. But the truth was that Gai Shishir was overthinking the matter. While it seemed to be logical, but in fact, except for the grand event on Taishan Mountain that day, Yi Futian had never seen Lord Taishan. So, how could he be his disciple? Lord Taishan left a space for him merely because he knew that the sword back then was from him. However, this man's swordsmanship was superb. He had incredible strength. Although he was only in the unblemished plane, his whole body was radiant, and the will of the way in him was glorious. It was as if he had ingested several fruits of the way, which boosted the body's vitality and essence. The will that was flowing out of him was no less than that of the nirvana plane. But even so, it was still difficult to force his way through by force. "There is no place for you here." In front of the divine tree, the young man next to Lu Qingyao said quietly. Suddenly several disciples of the divine palace expressed a look of sympathy. Even though he had demonstrated tyrannical prowess, there was still no place for Yi Futian. If he said no, then naturally there would be none. Yi Futian looked up at the sky and the divine tree of comprehension. There was no place for him. He stepped into the void and said with a smile, "What if I insist?" "Then try, and you will know," the young man from the divine palace continued, his tone indifferent but firm as if there was no room for doubts. Insist? Perhaps if he had reached nirvana plane, he would have a chance at a fight. But for now, as someone of the unblemished plane, he was not qualified to ask this question. Yi Futian glanced at the sky above, then walked toward Luo Yuming. He looked at the cultivators of the divine capital of Xiling. He said, "Hand over the fruits of the way that you have." Luo Yuming regarded him with an extremely somber countenance. A sword was circling Yi Futian. The sound of the sword chiming hurt their ears as the sword moved forward. It was now circling Luo Yuming, who was heavily injured. "If I had to do it myself, it would cost you much more than just some fruits of the way," Yi Futian said again. If they wanted his fruits, then they would have to pay the price. It would not be so cheap. Luo Yuming was not weak, and with the cultivators of the divine capital of Xiling, they should have robbed him of the fruits right away. Furthermore, as the son of old demon Luo, no one dared to fight Luo Yuming for it, and only he should be the one controlling the fruits. You sure you want them? Luo Yuming stared at Yi Futian. There were hints of demonic will in his pupils. Pust. The sword came down, and a terrible storm of sword qi went directly toward Luo Yuming. His face was extremely gloomy as he stretched out his palm, and 3 fruit of the way appeared suddenly. He tossed them toward Yi Futian. Yi Futian caught them, and put them away. He smiled and looked at Luo Yuming, saying, Judging from your strength, there ought to be more than 3. The divine capital of Xiling had 10 spaces, and with an average of 1 fruit of the way per person, they would need to raid no less than 10 fruits of the way to share them evenly. Even if not everyone received a fruit, 3 fruits of the way was simply too few. Based on Luo Yuming's character, he would definitely kill and plunder. From their entry into Taishan Mountain, intending to forcibly interrupt Lord Taishuan's breakthrough, their overbearing stance was more than obvious. Therefore, they could not possibly have so few fruits in their possession. It seems that I have to check myself. Yi Futian walked forward. Luo Yuming's face was gloomy. He said, Shenjing, I will remember your name. As he finished speaking, he waved his palm. One after the other, fruits of the way flew toward Yi Futian. Yi Futian stretched his hand and took them with a flick of his sleeve. He was able to take them in one swooping motion. There were 5 of them in total. As he expected, Luo Yuming had taken 8 fruits. He first handed over 3, wanting to hide the other 5. Then you better remember it well. Yi Futian turned around with a smile, without pursuing the matter further. With 8, he was already somewhat satisfied. In addition to the other fruits he had plundered before, and the divine tree of comprehension above, the harvest this time was bountiful. He means business. The people all around couldn't help but twitch a bit. In this land of trial, many didn't even get so much as 1 fruit, and others had been robbed of theirs. Yi Futian took care of the divine capital of Xiling, and took 8 fruits of the way. Coupled with what he already had, it was no wonder that he could afford to be so generous. He had given 2 fruits of the way to the woman in front of him. Junmu's face was becoming even more disturbed. The more outstanding Yi Futian was, the more it accentuated his pettiness from before. He could see that the eyes of the people around him had changed already. They were thinking that Shenjing had gotten so many fruits, that perhaps even Wan Shuyi and Luyue would all be able to partake. And they had up until now only procured 2 fruits by Junmu, which was simply not enough for everyone. These 2 fruits of the way probably wouldn't even be enough for Junmu himself. It was likely that he would never hand them over, but had saved them for himself. After he finished this, Yi Futian looked up and stepped forward, facing Wan Shuyi. He said, If I gift you a song, would you dare fight me? Wan Shuyi was stupefied. Was Yi Futian asking him to fight? Glancing at the figures above, there was Li Sun of the divine Swordly family, who had defeated him before, as well as Qin Zong of the Sky-Burying God clan. There was also Gai Shur of the Golden Divine Kingdom, and several direct disciples of the Divine Palace. Every one of them was of a genius-level existence, and they was not people he could contend with by himself. He knew this very well. But Yi Futian wanted him to fight. Clearly, Yi Futian wanted to enhance his swordsmanship with his music. Seeing Yi Futian's eyes, Wan Shuyi's enthusiasm was piqued once again, as it had been when he first entered the Sea of the Path. He replied, What is there to be afraid of? He stretched out his hand. The sword will moved about on his body, and the spirit of the sword appeared instantly. The palm of his hand went over the spirit of the sword, and drops of blood dripped down. A breath of terror flowed over the spirit of the sword, and the breath upon his body was madly rushing toward the spirit of the sword. Above the firmament, the sword will rolled in waves, and there seemed to be infinite sword chi being born. Sword come! Wan Shou shouted, and in an instant, infinite sword will poured into his body. It poured into the spirit of the sword, forged a dazzling divine sword. His body was bright all over, sharper than ever. The man and sword were now one. Behind Wan Shuyi, Yi Futian sat cross-legged, playing the guqin with both hands. When the music sounded, many felt their hair stand on end. Their bodies tensed up, and their hearts beat faster. Above the sky, wind and clouds were moving. Infinite melody integrated into Wan Shuyi's mind, and the music and the sword became one. At this moment, Wan Shuyi had a feeling that though he knew that he would lose, he was unafraid. Though the great path was imperfect, he would still break the shackles and compete with heaven and earth. At this moment he wanted to howl into the sky. The sound of guqin complemented his mood at the moment perfectly, and it also completed the sword. Thanks. Wan Shuyi raised his head to look into the void, and took a step forward. This expression of gratitude was naturally for Yi Futian. No matter victory or defeat, it was enough that he had this song to enhance this sword. This is impossible. Junmu couldn't help but make a sound. His face changed rapidly, and he even appeared a little pale. His eyes fixed on Yi Futian. This was absolutely impossible. The hearts of Li Jiying and Chen Yu were also beating violently. They felt a little unreal when they regarded Yi Futian. They had cultivated in Taishan Mountain for many years, and spent many years in String Valley. But they had never seen anyone from Taishan Mountain perform this song, never. And Yi Futian, how could he possibly know it? This song actually matched the music played by Lord Taishan that day. Although it was far from the artistic conception conveyed by Lord Taishan, it possessed quite some sophistication. This was the lost sound of the Great Path, the song of the lost divine. Was Shen Jing a direct disciple of Lord Taishan? Li Jiying couldn't help but ask herself if this was also the reason for Junmu's unrequited love affair. Yi Futian's knowledge of the song of the lost divine could only have one explanation. On Taishan Mountain, only the String Emperor had cultivated the song of the lost divine, and would not easily pass it on to ordinary disciples. But Lord Taishan made it clear that he would not accept disciples anymore. Once upon a time, her master, the Taishan Hierophant, had wanted to send her to Lord Taishan as an apprentice, but this had ultimately been refused by Lord Taishan. Not only the disciples of Taishan Mountain were full of suspicion, but everyone else thought so too, such as Gai Shirshir. Today, at this place of trial, someone actually performed the lost sound of the Great Path. A song of swordsmanship. Wan Shuyi's sword broke through the air. At this time, he had completely entered a state of ecstasy and total selflessness. When the way had been revealed, death was no longer fearsome. At this moment, he had the illusion that the way was upon him. Li Sun of the divine sword Li family emitted a dazzling sword light from his pupils. He took a step out, and countless divine swords fell down, slamming at Wan Shuyi. Wan Shuyi waved his sword, and the sword countered the Great Path. Li Sun's swords were torn and smashed instantly. A glimmer of the sky opened up, straight through the firmament. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Li Sun's expression changed rapidly. The spirit of the sword condensed and manifested. An infinite sword will descended from the sky. The divine sword of doomsday was born and fell straight down. Li Sun's expression changed rapidly. The spirit of the sword condensed and manifested. An infinite sword will descended from the sky. The divine sword of doomsday was born and fell straight down. Open! Li Sun shouted, and with it the sword descended. At the same time, Wan Shuyi's sword approached, and the two swords collided. In an instant, a violent storm of swordsmanship raged and swept wildly in all directions. Li Sun's sword was the sword of doomsday, meant to destroy all existence. Wan Shuyi's sword was the sword of reversal. The song of the lost sound of the Great Path signified the imperfection of the Great Path, and the only remedy was the sword. The sound of guqin could still be heard in the void, as countless notes merged into the sword, forming a reverse current of swordsmanship, which caused the sword river to reverse its course and flood toward Li Sun. Buzz! Everyone saw Li Sun's sword retreating, knocked back into the void, while Wan Shuyi was surrounded by infinite sword will. He took a step and reached for the sword and pointed it toward the sky. Instantly, a devastating storm of sword chi circled upward, intending to shatter the sky. Li Sun's expression was terrible. He had been defeated once before already. Futian and Wuxia teamed up and defeated him. Now this piece of music was even more powerful than the one performed previously, and Wuxia's sword was likewise stronger. But at this moment someone else made a move. Qin Zhang's palm pressed downward, and a force that could suppress the heavens came down. With it, stone tablets appeared between heaven and earth, and each tablet contained inscriptions composed of signs and symbols, camouflaging the will of the Great Path. Qin Zhang squeezed his palm, and suddenly, the many stone tablets revolved around Wuxia's body. At the same time, the infinite will of the Great Path that was hidden within the inscription of the tablets shot toward Wuxia, like golden flashes of lightning. Boom boom. Under the endless will of the inscriptions, Wuxia seemed to be trapped in it. Many stone tablets loomed over him, seemed to try to bury him. The sky-burying god clan claimed to be able to bury the Great Path of all heavens, arrogant beyond compare. Qin Zhang, as the genius existence of the sky-burying god clan, was super powerful. He was nearly at the peak, not far from Ren Huang. One could only imagine his prowess. The Great Path was buried in it. Countless golden lightning shot toward Wuxia, wrapping around his sword and destroying his will. But the melody of the music was still the same. As the music became more and more urgent, Wuxia swiped his palm across the sword in front of him, and there was blood on the sword, releasing a brilliant bloody light. At this moment, Wuxia closed his eyes. He wanted to forget about his sword, and immersed himself in the swordsmanship within the music, for that was the true Great Path. A momentous force came slaughtering toward him. Wuxia unleashed the sword strike, and the sword opened up the sky. In an instant, the sword light diffused, and silence filled the surrounding space. Everything seemed to be standing still. In the next moment, the crowd saw the stone tablets shattering bit by bit, disintegrating, and turning into dust in the void. Senior Brother Wan. Below, Luoyue was shocked to witness this scene. Her heart beat wildly, and her eyes were fixed on the sword above the sky. What seemed to be a strike that was quite unremarkable. Fleeting, Luoyue murmured under her breath. This was the fleeting divine sword. As time passed, all things withered away. Even if it was just a hint of fleeting, it was still so mighty, so powerful that it simply smashed Qin Zhang's overbearing attack, leaving no room for doubt. However, Senior Brother One hadn't even truly mastered the second level of the divine sword. Cleave of all things. So how could he have released fleeting? Was it because of the music? The lost sound of the Great Path, the song of the lost divine. The song had allowed Wuxia to experience the way. It was a true experience at that. Since he had already experienced the feel of it, then he would most certainly get to that place someday in the future. Could the song of the lost divine really be this magical? She had heard her father saying that Lord Taixian had comprehended the way from music and realized many abilities, including the ultimate swordsmanship, the fleeting divine sword, and many other methods. All were from his own cultivation, and integrated with his comprehension of the lost sound of the Great Path, which finally formed his own method. The stone tablets were shattered, and Wuxia continued upward. Another sword strike was unleashed, and even that divine tree of comprehension let out some noises. The other cultivators changed their expressions when they saw what he was doing. More golden divine lightning came down from above. It was absolutely domineering. A figure seemed to directly stop the Great Path of Insight. Instead, he stepped out and came to the sky above Wuxia. It was Gai Shir of the Divine Golden Nation. One after another, golden spears penetrated the void, moving toward Wuxia. The heaven and earth cried out, as if on the verge of destruction. The endless golden spears came down murderously. But under the fleeting divine sword, everything was annihilated into nothingness. But there was an even more disturbing scene above the dome. An ancient golden god stood in the sky and merged as one with Gai Shir, so that he seemed to have been transformed into an ancient god. He was even more dominating and incomparable. The ancient god held out his hand, and the countless golden spears above the sky gathered into one. They transformed into a substantial golden divine spear, and aimed straight down below. There seemed to be endless golden lightning around the golden spear, and this blow seemed capable of destroying and shattering the world. Wan Shuyi still didn't retreat. The sword went straight for the golden spear. The fleeting divine sword collided with the long spear of celestial divinity. Countless golden lightning drowned and pulverized it. But the sword also retreated. How strong! The crowd looked at the golden spear of Gai Shirshir, whose attack was extremely overbearing. It caused the formation of a destructive vortex of a storm in the space where they were. Wake up! In the void, the disciple of Divine Palace, Bai Xiao squeezed his palm in midair. Instantly, Wan Shuyi felt very uncomfortable. It was as if all his senses were isolated. However, Wan Shuyi still did not retreat. He dragged his sword toward the void, his eyes still closed, moving toward the sky above step by step. The sound of Guqin was so pure in his ears that at this moment, no matter the outcome, whether it was winning or losing, he would able to accept either. Boom! Gai Shirshir moved again. The golden divine spear passed through heaven and earth as other cultivators also attacked in unison. But Wan Shuyi still moved forward and unleashed the last strike. The crowd saw a sword light, brilliant like fireworks. The glory of that instant was so dazzling that it moved and shocked everyone who beheld it. The moment the sword light fell, everything withered, and many methods of attack around him were pulverized into dust. Even that golden spear was breaking inch by inch. It shattered until it became nothing. One sword breaks all methods. Anyone who stared at this scene was trembling and speechless. Wan Shuyi was actually able to unleash such a sword strike. Ahem! A light cough was heard, and there was blood trailing down from the corner of Wan Shuyi's mouth. His breath was weakening rapidly. He was clearly unable to fight any longer. In fact, in his previous battle with Li Sun, he had served the sword spirit with blood, and even more so in this battle. He had exhausted the strength of his body to the extreme, thus making that final instant of glory possible. Although he could fight no longer, Wan Shuyi's eyes revealed a smile. This was swordsmanship. He finally understood. I've been enlightened, Wan Shuyi said to those in the void, then turned to leave, and did not continue to fight. The others also did not pursue the fighter, and did not take advantage of him. They were all top figures from all places. Though they were not friendly toward Wan Shuyi, they would not make their move at a time like this to do something beneath their honor. Wan Shuyi ought to be proud of this battle, even though he had the accompaniment of the music. Wan Shuyi returned to Yi Futian's side, bowed and smiled. Much thanks to you. Brother Wan has advised me many times before. I'm only doing what I should, Yi Futian said. He took out a fruit of the way, and handed it to Wan Shuyi. Eat. Fruit of life. Wan Shuyi looked up at Yi Futian. You really need it now, Yi Futian said. As for what Xiaqing Yuan needed, he would have to get it from above. Smiling, Wan Shuyi didn't refuse, but took the fruit directly and swallowed it. The feeling of his weakened breath rapidly recovering was indescribably buoyant. Little Phoenix was a little jealous seeing all this. What about her? She couldn't compete with the women, but not even men? This guy must be jealous of her beauty and talent, afraid that she would kick him aside if she had taken the fruit of the way. Jun Mu and the others lamented when they saw Wan Shuyi taking the fruit, and several others around him felt regretful. Yi Futian did not promise them anything, and even made it clear that he would not share his fruits with them. But at this time, he gifted a song of swordsmanship to Wan Shuyi and gave him the fruit to eat, all of which was to aid Wan Shuyi in his transformation. After this trip, Wan Shuyi's strength would reach to a whole new level. When did you learn to? Luoyue looked at Yi Futian, halting in her question. She wanted to know about the Song of the Lost Divine. Didn't Lord Taishian played it once? Yi Futian said with a smile. That day on Taishian Mountain? But it was just the one time, Luoyue said. Because I was good at other well-known songs. I connected with the song that Lord Taishian performed. I had some foundation that I could leverage. In reality, it was far from being the lost sound of the Great Path, Yi Futian said. If it were the complete lost sound of the Great Path, with his assistance, Wan Shuyi's sword would have had no problem dealing with those people above. Luoyue was a little speechless upon hearing Yi Futian's response. Could it be that she was wrong? Yi Futian was not a disciple who was secretly accepted by Lord Taishian, but talent such as this was, frankly, a little too frightening. Yi Futian glanced at Luoyue, then stepped forward. Inside his body, The ancient tree of the world was swaying. Many wills of the way had now turned to swordsmanship. In one turn of the mind, great changes had taken place within the great path, and only the sword remained eternal. He walked under the divine tree of comprehension, looked up at the sky and said, "Since none of you will relinquish your space, I guess I have to take it myself." As his words fell, he walked forward toward the mountain. Delusional. The look of the cultivators from Divine Palace was one of great indifference. This man was extremely proud. Even the disciples of the Divine Palace were never being taken seriously by him. He had even robbed Lu Qingyao, a direct disciple. The speaker was Bai Xiao. As he looked down at Yi Futian, his eyes seemed to be apparitional, like an invisible wool flowing between the sky and the earth. When those eyes gazed upon him, Yi Futian felt his life spirit seemed to have been locked onto. Bai Xiao, a disciple of the Divine Palace, was an expert of the attack on spiritual soul, and his master was Lord Underworld. Likewise, Yi Futian also glanced at the void. His pupils became extremely terrifying, even emitting a demonic breath. Those pupils seemed to penetrate all the nothingness. They directly penetrated into Bai Xiao's eyes, causing the slight change in Bai Xiao's expression. "Whoever makes a move, that's the position I want," Yi Futian said, continuing upward, toward no one in particular, but everyone above. "If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible." Each major cultivator had already occupied a position in front of the divine tree of comprehension, and had no intention to make room for anyone else. Whoever attempted to go up would be crushed by all the cultivators there. Each major cultivator had already occupied a position in front of the divine tree of comprehension, and had no intention to make room for anyone else. Whoever attempted to go up would be crushed by all the cultivators there. Everyone also saw what happened just now, and that everyone above had attacked together. Now Yi Futian claimed that whoever made a move, that would be the space he wanted. This was no longer aimed at any one of them, but to anyone who dared to make a move. That could be everyone who was currently up there. What a pompous attitude. In front of the divine tree, everyone looked indifferent as their eyes pierced Yi Futian. Whether it was the top characters or disciples of the Divine Palace, they had never seen anyone so arrogant. Even in the Divine Palace, there was no disciple who dared act so presumptuously. But Yi Futian stepped up, and was indeed by himself, walking toward the top. The wind howled desolately, and the will of the way flowed, all blowing on him, causing his white robe to flutter rapidly. Watching his back as he walked away from the crowd, everyone could feel a sense of haughty loneliness. One man alone, walking toward the divine tree. Bai Xiao's eyes were terrifying. A mysterious airflow was surging, enveloping the world. At this moment, even the people watching the battle from below felt the pressure of the spiritual soul. In the sky above, a ghostly face appeared faintly until it blended in with the sky and became one. A pair of terrifying eyes looked down, and many people felt that their spiritual souls were trembling. Lord Underworld did not have many direct disciples, but every one of them was very dangerous in their own right. This kind of attack on the spiritual soul was extremely perilous, as it could directly target the spiritual power of cultivators. It was truly threatening. Clearly, Bai Xiao also felt that Yi Futian was an expert of spiritual power, because his countenance was particularly grave. Those ghostly eyes locked onto the other's spiritual soul, rushing into Yi Futian's eyes. But it was ultimately useless. Yi Futian's eyes were equally terrible, and the sword will everywhere on his body could directly destroy the power he released. Stretching out his palm and swiping downward, suddenly, a great handprint appeared in the void. It was directly aimed at Yi Futian's spiritual soul, hand of the underworld. Many ordinary disciples from the Divine Palace trembled as they saw this scene in front of them. Bai Xiao's strength was so great that even some whose cultivation was stronger than his lost, because they could not resist the power of attack on their spiritual souls. It was still unknown if Yi Futian could contend with Lord Underworld's disciple Bai Xiao. The others made no move, and were just watching Bai Xiao. They wanted to see just how far this arrogant swordsman from Taishan Mountain, who wanted to fight everyone, could go. Yi Futian's perception was so powerful that he naturally perceived an immense great hand of the underworld grabbing toward him silently. It was not directed at the flesh, but at the spiritual soul. This attack was similar to celestial soul attraction. But after Yi Futian had cultivated the celestial soul attraction, he further combined the celestial soul attraction with his method. He was confident that it would be way stronger than the other's power from the underworld. Bang! Yi Futian continued to march upward, and the momentous power from his body rolled out. The veins inside his body seemed to be transformed into veins of swords. In the world of the spiritual soul, the ancient tree of life took on the shape of sword. Sword spirit chimed in his life palace, clamoring to rush out. Above Yi Futian's body, there were countless currents of swordsmanship flowing, following his footsteps. They went up against the trend. The whistling sword gave a sense of suffocation between heaven and earth. A pressure of might descended invisibly. The great hand of the underworld slammed down, but it was penetrated by the countless airflow of swordsmanship. In an instant, the great hand of the underworld continued to collapse and shatter, turning into nothingness under the sword will. Buzz! Yi Futian took a step. His pupil was as sharp as a sword. It aimed at Bai Xiu's eyes. He said, "Since you made a move, give up your position." As his voice fell, he pointed his finger up. A sword opened a glimmer of the sky, penetrating the void. It moved toward Bai Xiu, full of murderous intent. This sword could extinguish the soul. Bai Xiu's expression changed. He was extremely good at the spiritual soul attack, so he was slightly lacking in other areas. However, the spiritual soul attack did not seem to be able to suppress Yi Futian, and the opponent's counterattack power, like him, contained the spirit attack power. Poof! The sword penetrated the void, and Bai Xiu's body seemed to have been pierced through, but there was no blood. The figure gradually disappeared into a shadow. Bai Xiu appeared next to it. Both seemed a bit surreal. The eye of the underworld. Bai Xiu's eyes suddenly turned a dark blood red, and in a flash, the sky changed color. It was as if a god of the underworld appeared. Yi Futian seemed to have fallen into it completely, and had entered another space. All he could see was a pair of bloody eyes, the eyes of the underworld. Refine! Bai Xiu's eyes ignited a fire of the underworld, and in a moment, the fire of the way was burning. The space Yi Futian was in was wrapped up in the fire of the underworld. It was an attempt to melt his spiritual soul. The heart of the people below trembled, for Yi Futian was in trouble. Although Bai Xiu was young in age, no one expected that he had already cultivated his master's art to such a fearsome state. The eye of underworld, and the fire of the underworld. Being shrouded by this force, Yi Futian felt greatly uncomfortable. His eyes were cold and indifferent, his hands outstretched. Suddenly, an infinite number of swords appeared around him. His eyes closed, and the sword will grew stronger. The roaring storm of sword chi flooded the space instantly. Finally, he opened his eyes to look up at the sky. It was a pair of sword eyes, directly piercing the void. His palm pointing to the void, and hundreds of thousands of swords unleashed at the same time. The great path reversed course. The constellation of stars changed position, and in a flash, the swordsmanship broke through the shrouding of the eyes of the underworld and rolled toward the sky. Furthermore, the sword in the sky above resonated with the great path, shattering everything into nothingness, and aiming toward Bai Xiu in the sky above. Fleeing divine sword. Seeing this scene, Wan Shuyi and Luoyue were both shocked to their cores. Yi Futian had already mastered the essence of the third level of the fleeting divine sword, fleeting years. The song he played just now not only enlightened him, but also allowed Yi Futian himself to comprehend the fleeting divine sword. This attack had already encompassed the heart of the fleeting years, although it had not created the divine wheel of the great path, and was thus unable to release the true might of fleeting years. Even so, the destructive scene of the storm of swordsmanship annihilating the void was still awesome to behold. Many were worried about Bai Xiu. When the sword slammed toward him, Bai Xiu was wrapped inside the sword storm, and a brilliant divine light was shining and blooming there. With a wet sound, Bai Xiu groaned, and his face had gone pale. He spat up blood. His body was also knocked back, struck far away from the sky above the divine tree of comprehension. His breath was greatly weakened, and even rays of dark currents now appeared on his face. Only Bai Xiu himself could know just how powerful this sword strike was. It was not simply the fleeting divine sword, but it also contained within its sword will that was meant to destroy the spiritual soul. All the direct disciples were defeated. Everyone below who had seen the two of them dueling in the air was greatly shaken in their hearts. Shen Jing was truly powerful. He was the strongest person from Taishan Mountain. It seemed that this time, Taishan Mountain was also about to produce a top prominent figure. Lu Qingyao was not surprised to see this. She had suffered badly at Yi Futian's hands, so Bai Xiu's defeat did not surprise her. However, Yi Futian's spiritual power was so impressive that the fruit of life had probably added even more to enhance his spiritual soul. His position is mine, Yi Futian said while he continued moving upward, full of pride and confidence, showing that he was unafraid of confrontation. Allow me to experience your sword, Li Sun said. Twice he was defeated by Wan Shuyi. Even though it was the power of the music that helped to augment its power, he had already felt frustrated and questioned his own swordsmanship. So he wanted to try again. The divine sword of Doomsday was born, and Li Sun took a step forward. He moved out of his position and unleashed an amazing sword strike from the firmament. He destroyed everything in its path. I oblige you. Yi Futian stepped up and unleashed a strike of his own. The two swords collided, and countless currents of swordsmanship rolled in the direction of the other, immense and endless. The space likewise made an incredibly sharp and harsh sound, which made everyone's scalps crawl. Many who were below felt suffocated. If they were between the two swords, they probably would be torn to pieces. The sword qi inside Yi Futian's body was majestic, flowing ceaselessly. Though the two appeared to be in a stalemate, Yi Fu's momentum was gaining, and Li Sun was getting weaker. As a muffled sound came out, the sword was clearly broken. Li Sun's body seemed to be penetrated by the sword will and flew backward. 2 positions, Yi Futian said, continuing to move forward. He was not moving fast, and even looked a little slow as he moved toward the sky above. That lonely but proud figure seemed to dare to make enemies with the geniuses of the upper heavens realm. How powerful! The people underneath exclaimed secretly. Previously, all the cultivators wanted to force their way but couldn't, and they were all kicked off. Now, only Yi Futian was walking alone up there. Junmu watched him with some jealousy. What other cultivators on Taishan Mountain would know the name of Junmu any longer? This Shenjing seemed to have become the symbol of Taishan Mountain. And even if there was no Shenjing, there was still Wan Shuyi. What would become of Junmu? Moreover, whatever occurred before had only tainted his name. Other cultivators from Taishan Mountain also felt a little dreamy. The disciples of Taishan Mountain were powerless. And now, a musician was going up there alone, contemptuous of the disciples of the Divine Palace, who were also the top geniuses of the upper heavens realm. No matter who made the move, they would now need to make way. Perhaps this could be considered as peerless. Lord Taishuan's breakthrough was known throughout the upper heavens. Only such a magnetic personality could match the reputation of Taishan Mountain today. Wan Shuyi said under his breath. The fight on that day on Taishan Mountain and the flight today both provoked many thoughts in him. The disciples of Taishan Mountain were all too weak and were unable to do justice to the name of Lord Taishan. Only a few direct disciples of the Hierophant himself could match their reputation. As for the 3rd generation, there was literally no one who could be a proper representative. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Upon the mountain of the way, before the divine tree of comprehension, all eyes were fastened on Yi Futian. Upon the mountain of the way, before the divine tree of comprehension, all eyes were fastened on Yi Futian. After the successive defeats of Bai Xiu and Li Sun, if they allowed this man to force his way onto the mountain of the way in such a fashion, then none of them on the mountain, right now, would ever be able to lift their heads after this day. When Yi Futian uttered those pompous words, he was destined not to have the opportunity to go near the divine tree of comprehension. Watching that figure move up step by step, an invisible storm of the great path rose between heaven and earth. and several different breaths came descending down, oppressing Yi Futian's body. It seemed that if he continued to force his way up the mountain, then those above would all join hands to stop him. A terrible hurricane gathered around Changfeng Lai of the Changfeng family, while there was a starry river coursing over Qin Zong of the Sky-Burying God clan. As to the absolute genius of the Golden Divine Nation, Gai Shi, his entire body radiated golden divine light as he looked down at Futian. Whoever tried to stop him, whoever would need to vacate their position, a cultivator of unblemished realm, even if he had really inherited it from Lord Taishian. What of it? It was true that the Song of the Lost Divine and Fleeting Divine Sword were both great treasures of Taishian Mountain, but they, too, were in control of the powerful methods of their own influential families. Gai Shi, who was known as the future leader of the Golden Divine Nation, as well as the most genius existence of his generation of talents, was standing here. So how could he allow Yi Futian to make these wild claims and make his way up this mountain? At this time, Gai Shi had no other doubts and firmly believed that Yi Futian was a secret disciple of Lord Taishian, that this was the first time he tried to prove himself to the outside world. Even before he came along, Lord Taishian had already made a choice. Moreover, the person chosen by Lord Taishian did not disappoint. This Shen Jing was indeed extraordinary, whether it was his talent in swordsmanship or music. Furthermore, Shen Jing was incredibly patient in keeping all this to himself. Everyone on Taishian Mountain thought that was just a mere musician. Not even the disciples knew. Judging from that, he was quite a frightening character. It was just that now, as things stood where they were, there was no choice but to continue one way or the other. Boom! The glory of stars shone brightly, and the stone tablets of the great path stones condensed and manifested, appearing all around Yi Futian. The bright divine light that was released from those tablets shrouded Yi Futian. An audible rustling sharp sound started, and Yi Futian continued upward, ignoring the oppressive force of the great path. But that the stone tablet of the great path circulated around Yi Futian's body. As the other closed his palm, in an instant, an infinite number of stone tablets enveloped Yi Futian's body and sealed off heaven and earth. Dark clouds shrouded the sky and became invisible to the eyes. Psst! A sharp sound was heard as Yi Futian raised his finger, pointing to the sky. Immediately a devastating storm was raised, annihilating those bombarding stone tablets of the great path. Qin Zhang's two hands were forming the seal, and violent booming sounds came out loudly. Stone tablets that were even greater than before now descended, coming from all directions. In an instant, this space turned into a starry world. It was as if they had been transported to another element. What was even more terrifying was that every stone tablet contained the will of the way, and the will in these stone tablets bloomed and radiated toward Yi Futian at the same time. Yi Futian seemed to be in an absolute starry world. He felt like he was being imprisoned inside. Boom! Each stone table was releasing a superbly powerful light of destruction that wanted to obliterate all existence in its path. Countless lights of destruction were simultaneously falling down, with him as the center. It was as if he was in the very center of the storm. There was nowhere to run and nowhere to hide. At this time, looking from the outside and below, everyone could see that the storm of the great path surrounding Yi Futian had vaguely turned into one giant ancient character berry. In this whole destructive space of the great path, it was just like that giant word berry indicated. Everything in that space was to be destroyed and buried. As one of the top forces in the upper heavens realm, the prowess of the Sky-Burying God clan was terrifying. The will from the stone tablets was constantly smashing down on him. Yi Futian's body seemed to have turned golden, radiant and dazzling without compare. But when that will of the great path rushed inside his body, Yi Futian clearly felt that the power inside his body seemed to be buried and imprisoned. There was a power of the way that could block all other will. This was the power that sealed the great path. Yi Futian's looked internally, and he seemed to see that there was a character that had been engraved upon his body. It was the spell of entombment. From inside to outside, this character was everywhere, wrapping him up in it layer by layer. It was completely buried and destroyed. The will of the great path is the same. Whoever can suppress the other depends on who's stronger, everyone said in their hearts. An extreme divine light of the great path erupted from Yi Futian's body, as if urging all his power forth. His body screamed, the blood in his veins roiling. The force of the fruit of the way that he swallowed before now burst out violently, and with great force, turning into the same power of the great path, the path of destruction. This power of the great path roared madly within the body, destroying the shackles inside. At the same time, Yi Futian's sword spirit shone through. He held the sword in his right hand, pointing to the sky. He unleashed the fleeting divine sword. All things passed away like time. All that was around now dissipated and perished at a rapid rate. Boom, boom, boom. The stone tablets were smashed and exploded directly as the people below looked at Yi Futian. Although there was only one sword, this sword seemed like thousands of swords striking all at once. Still can't be taken? Many people secretly said as they watched Yi Futian continue walking up the mountain of the way. Even Qin Zong of the Sky-Burying God clan was useless, and could not crush Yi Futian. But at this time, there was a stunning golden divine light shining and blooming above the sky. Many were watching the battlefield of the two previously, ignoring what was above. In another direction, a golden ancient god appeared. This golden ancient god was radiant all over, like a golden statue, or a golden god of war. Divine light of the great path between heaven and earth all gathered towards his body, endless and infinite, creating an incomparable body of the golden ancient god. The golden ancient god clan. Everyone recalled the myth of the golden divine nation. It was rumored that the royal family of the golden divine nation claimed to be the descendants of the ancient god clan. They were born differently from all the others, and were of the most supreme bloodline of the human race. Golden divine blood flowed in their bodies, so they were born with unparalleled power. In this era, it was said that a cultivator from the golden divine nation was the divine general of Danhuang the Great. How glorious! At this time, infinite golden divine light created a golden divine spear. This divine spear was cast by gold. Just one look, and one could feel the domineering power. Gai Shishir stood above the void, looking down at Yi Futian, who was below. Before, many people believed that Gai Shishir was probably the strongest among all who were present. Although those direct disciples of the divine palace were also extremely outstanding, ultimately, they were not the most outstanding from the divine palace. Those who were of the most genius existence were qualified to obtain the fruits of the way, thus receiving better treatment. But Gai Shishir was truly the unparalleled character of this generation of golden divine nation. By comparison, Luo Yuming, the son of old demon Luo of the divine capital of Xiling, could hardly be compared with him. Many people agreed that Gai Shishir was one of the strongest people on this trip, and perhaps may even be the strongest of them all. Now even he would have to fight Yi Futian? They heard that Gai Shishir went to Taishian Mountain, and had intended to be a disciple of Lord Taishian, but was refused. And Yi Futian very possibly could be a secret heir of Lord Taishian. When Yi Futian broke Qin Zhang's attack, that was when Gai Shishir made his move. That peerless divine general took the golden divine spear and lanced to the space below. In an instant, countless golden spears fell down simultaneously, tearing up the void. Everything was about to be smashed away. The golden divine spear aimed straight toward Yi Futian without any frills. Golden divine light appeared between heaven and earth. At this time, Yi Futian felt an extremely powerful oppressive force, watching the golden divine spear coming toward him unstoppable. The attack was boundlessly domineering, and the technique of the attack was befitting of its name. Above Yi Futian's body, an incomparably strong breath erupted. The will of the way rumbled and roiled, all gathering within the sword. The sword unleashed and went for the golden spear. Boom! There was a loud boom, and there seemed to be countless golden lightning directly rushing into Yi Futian's body. The golden divine light raged within his body, wreaking havoc. Yi Futian's body was knocked back by the force, and for the first time, he could not continue to move forward, but stumbled backward instead. He looked up at the indomitable figure in the void, while also feeling its power inside his body. Entirely too strong. Is this Gai Shishir? Everyone looked at the invincible figure in the void, as he was blocking the top along with Qin Zong. It seemed that Shen Jing would not have a chance to break through this heavy defense. Who else do you want to try and vacate? Gai Shishir looked down at Yi Futian below and asked. As the golden god of war, who could block him and ask him to give up his position? He wanted to see just how Yi Futian would try and achieve that. Yi Futian looked up at the sky above. Gai Shishir's reputation was well deserved. This man's attack power was very strong, but it was better this way. Just unblemished after all. Gai Shishir looked down at Yi Futian below, the divine light blooming. The sky turned to gold. Qin Zong continued to attack as countless stone tablets surrounded Yi Futian's body, pressuring downward. The will of the way exploded and locked onto Yi Futian's body. At the same time, Gai Shishir's golden divine spear once again smashed down with unstoppable force. The two top characters in the upper heavens realm moved in unison. Was this an attempt to kill Yi Futian? But it seemed that they would need to at least consider the reaction of Taishan Mountain. Yi Futian's body went up against the resistance. He deliberately did not avoid it, but directly moved to confront and destroy the will within the stone tablets. His sword went straight for the divine spear. Bang! The power of the golden divine spear directly penetrated through the body. Turbulence raged inside Yi Futian, and a golden divine light flowed through the veins in his body, tearing and smashing. At the same time, there was an incredibly abundant breath of life that was repairing the power inside of him. Yi Futian seemed to have completely ignored his injuries as he moved again toward Gai Shishir. Yaya saw Yi Futian's movements, and a disturbed look flashed in her eyes. What was he going to do? Suddenly, she seemed to have thought of a certain possibility as her face suddenly turned pale. She looked at Yi Futian coldly. This B** was too crazy. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Both of their attacks collided again. Yi Futian's sword had the advantage, but Gai Shishir's golden divine spear had no frills. It was purely dominant. Both of their attacks collided again. Yi Futian's sword had the advantage, but Gai Shishir's golden divine spear had no frills. It was purely dominant. The divine spear contained not only a mighty power, but also the might of the space. The descendants of the ancient gods possess golden divine blood, which was used to form the divine spear. His attack power was known as the divine god spear. The violent storm of sword chi continued to burst and shatter, destroying all things with the divine god spear. The great path was about to be penetrated, as Yi Futian's body seemed to be tumbling and screaming inside. It was like all his nerves and veins were bursting and crushing. There was a loud bang, and his body was knocked back again. His body whirled and shuttled through the void, but he was still moving forward. You'll die. Lu Qingyao chided coldly as an ultimate chill descended over everything. Everything was frozen shut. With Yi Futian's body as the center, all flows in this world seemed to have slowed down as a terrible ice cold might now try to invade Yi Futian. Previously, Yi Futian had injured her and robbed her of her fruit of the way. Clearly, she had forgiven nor forgotten either. Frost covering his body, Yi Futian's speed seemed to slow down. Qin Zong glanced at him and made a grabbing motion in the air. Many stone tablets projected the divine radiance of the great path, shrouding Yi Futian within it. The word bury once again appeared as the tablets moving forward, locking Futian in that will of the way and burying him. The people below felt shocked when they saw what was happening before them. Though Shen Jing's talent and strength were incredibly strong, he still seemed to have underestimated these top and excellent opponents. Gai Shishir and Qin Zong both were absolutely capable of becoming direct disciples. It was said that Gai Shishir was just unwilling to cultivate at the Divine Palace, which Qin Zong might very well join later. Not to mention, there were also Chang Fenglai, Lu Qingyao, and the others. He ignored all these top characters and tried to force his way to the front of the divine tree of comprehension. It never would have been an easy thing. As tough as he was, he still couldn't get up there. At this time, endless golden divine light raged upon the sky and fell on the divine spear. The figure that was transformed into the golden ancient god took the divine spear in his hand and pointed to the sky below. When he saw Yi Futian's sword had broken Qin Zhang's destructive method, the golden light from his eyes was extremely cold. It didn't matter that Lord Taixian refused him as a disciple. He didn't need anyone's help in cultivation, but he would never admit that he was any less than anyone in the upper heavens realm. Shenzhing is in danger. When many people saw this, they exclaimed in their hearts. Gai Shirshir had gathered the momentum of the Great Path. Its might dominated the world. When this divine spear smashed down, it would be a disaster for Yi Futian. Luoyue's expression also changed. Wan Shuyi's body now permeated with sword will. He stepped into the void, intending to join the battle. Don't interfere. Next to him, Yaya glanced at Wan Shuyi and said. Looking into Yaya's eyes, Wan Shuyi was stunned momentarily. Don't interfere? This is the divine god spear. Its attack power is superior. There are not many other methods that could match the divine god spear, Wan Shuyi said. And Gai Shirshir himself was a descendant of the ancient gods. Golden blood flowed in his body, and he had cultivated with the divine god spear for many years, so the two were moving in great harmony. If the divine god spear and the fleeing divine sword were of a certain level, Gai Shirshir's mastery of the divine god spear was definitely not any lesser than Yi Futian's comprehension of the fleeting divine sword. He had been immersed in it since a young age, and it perfectly complemented his method. With his natural suitability for its cultivation and his current realm of nirvana, it was not hard to imagine the extent of its prowess. Now, Yi Futian had been repeatedly hindered, with several powerful cultivators teamed up against him. Obviously, Gai Shirshir's counterattack would be merciless and deadly. If no one were to lend him a helping hand, Yi Futian would most certainly be in danger. Trust him. Yaya's tone was still very cold, but there was absolute confidence in this cold indifference. Looking at those eyes, Wan Shuyi started to think that perhaps she knew that Shenzhing possessed more strength. Yaya was different from Wan Shuyi. Wan Shou had only seen one side of Yi Futian, but Yaya had been with Yi Futian for many years. She knew Yi Futian too well, and had already guessed what Yi Futian was about to do. Despite what might appear to be crazy antics, if he made that choice, it must be that he was sure of his judgment. In that case, she would choose to trust him, so she didn't get involved. Wan Shuyi retracted his sword will, and did not proceed to make a move. His eyes focused on the sky above. On this trip, Yi Futian had been kind to him, so if Yi Futian were really in a jam, he would pledge his sword no matter the cost. Pust. Sharp and shrilling sounds came out from the void, but in the next moment, there seemed to be immense pressure from the sky. A god was descending, divine spear in hand, cleaving open heaven and earth, and the divine spear made of gold directly moved toward Yi Futian. Countless golden divine lights flooded this void, piercing Yi Futian's eyes and body. His sword swung out, and the endless sword will was about to bloom, but was destroyed immediately. A dull groan was heard as countless golden divine lights rushed into Yi Futian's body, seemingly penetrating his body. He looked up at the figure that was trying to slaughter him. Gai Shirshir of the Gold Divine Nation had incarnated into the battle form of divine god with an immense and domineering spirit. His eyes radiated of golden glory that others dared not look directly at. The light pierced his dark eyes, sharp beyond compare. This spear was meant to destroy. Endless power of destruction rushed into Yi Futian's body. At this time, Yi Futian's insides were turning into a roaring sea of the way. The great path roared and raged. Veins and nerves were broken. The blood inside his body was roiling, and even all of his internal organs were tumbling and on the verge of destruction. His breath seemed to be weakening rapidly. He seemed about to be wiped out under such a violent blow. Yi Futian's eyes revealed nothing but endless tranquility. The space below was infinitely silent. Everyone was looking at the scene in the void. Would Yi Futian be incapacitated? A coldness flashed through Junmu's eyes. Even though he had been dazzling for a moment, he was too conceited after all. If he could have kept a low profile and been patient like he was at Taixian Mountain, he might have had the chance to grow. But unfortunately, in a place of trial like this at the Divine Palace, with all those domineering characters, no mercy would be shown him in such direct confrontations. This blow was enough to destroy Yi Futian's talent. Although the place where the two collided was still ravaged by endless will of the way, the two figures seemed to have stopped, their bodies motionless. Cracks now appeared in their swords as if they might break at any time. Yi Futian's body was still rumbled, but a vigorous will of life now wrapped around his body, and Yi Futian's eyes actually showed a smile. Seeing this smile, Gai Shirshir frowned. How could he smile? However, the next moment, he seemed to detect something and vaguely felt that something was wrong. Yi Futian's weakened breath was actually increasing against the odds, and there was a violent will of the great path in his body that roared. The blood in his veins tossed and turned, and a divine will now swept out as his breath rapidly climbed, becoming stronger and stronger. He soon had returned to the peak, and was still increasing in strength. The people below also felt it, and countless eyes fastened on Yi Futian. How could this be possible? And was he leveraging the situation for a breakthrough? In the realm of Saint Plain, the level of unblemished was already an indicator of perfection without fault, hence unblemished, so why was there still a nirvana above it? Nirvana was actually a transitional state. From saint to renhuang, to enter renhuang, one must first achieve nirvana. Therefore this realm was extremely difficult to achieve. This was a threshold that had blocked countless other cultivators. Nirvana was but a heart that was not bound. The great path formed naturally, and everything inside the body was rebuilt. The mind was, at this point, transformed, and the divine wheel of the great path had been made to make way for the Renhuang realm. This realm was the transformation of the Saint Plane. It was the preparation before stepping into Renhuang realm. Yi Futian had devoured several fruits of the way successively. He had cultivated for several years, and his will of the way was strong enough to reach this level. His state of mind had been stable. Now he was dedicated to seek the great path, and nothing could stop him from entering the way. All he needed was an opportunity. This trip was such an opportunity, and this battle was his opportunity. So he wanted to use the power of these people to forcibly reshape himself. This was actually somewhat risky, but he had swallowed the life spring water and taken the fruit of life. Even if he failed, he could bear the consequences. Therefore, he was unafraid. At this moment, he was rebuilding the meridians of the great path. The reshaped meridians in his body seemed to leave engraved marks, and the same was on his bones. The vitality of all his internal organs was even more robust and vigorous as the breath inside his body continued to become stronger, reaching for higher limits. In the Life Palace, the ancient tree of the world was swaying. It was as if the world of the Life Palace had become broader, and the will of way stronger. The sword held in the sky. Above the firmament, infinite sword will float around Yi Futian, entering his body, invading his sword spirit. The cracks on the sword were repaired, becoming straight as a terrifying storm of sword chi surged upwards. It wrapped around the sky, and took aim at the body of the divine god. Millions of sword will penetrated the godlike body, trying to tear it apart. Gai Shirshir slammed into the void. The golden divine spear vibrated, and the two bodies separated. Gai Shirshir reappeared above the sky, looking down at Yi Futian below. By his power, Yi Futian had broken into nirvana. He actually became the instrument that made Yi Futian. 10,000 swords now returned, and the sword will seem to flow within the vast expanse. Yi Futian looked at the few people in the void, including Gai Shirshir, and smiled. Many thanks to you. At this time, the breath from his body had already crossed unblemished and entered nirvana. He was one step closer to Renhuang. You did it. Yaya looked at Yi Futian. A rare smile revealed in her eyes. Yi Futian had also stepped into nirvana. That young man, who once wanted her to call him brother, at the Tombkeeper village, grew one step at a time, and was now in the same realm as her. He would chase that legendary realm with her. He broke through the barrier of the realm in this manner? Wan Shuyi looked on speechlessly at the scene in the void. How magnificent this was, and was this still that humble musician he knew? If he had failed, what kind of painful ending would it be? At least, he would not dare, and not many others would not take such risks. It was really insane. He forcibly entered the mountain of the way while in unblemished plain, and now has passed the trial and achieved nirvana. To him, this mountain is probably not high enough. Luoyue murmured next to him. Wan Shi also looked at that mountain, and said with a smile, "Indeed, this mountain is not high enough for him. Those on the mountain of the way, who else could stop him? His mountain should be higher." Yi Futian looked down below. He was extremely calm. He glanced at the divine tree of comprehension and said, "It seems that all the positions are mine. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible." Nirvana. Nirvana. Guy Sure murmured. But even so, what of it? In his eyes, the golden divine light was still there, breathtaking. He had a brilliant talent that was ranked first in this generation of the golden divine nation. No one could overtake him. The golden divine nation had great hopes for him to surpass Ren Huang and achieve even a higher and more supreme realm. Many people believed that in the future, Guy Sure would inherit the golden divine nation and became its master. Of course, he would not dwell on these matters. Power, to him, was as fleeting as the clouds. What he wanted was the ultimate strength, so that at a certain level, everything would come easily. To enter nirvana, can you withstand the spear of the gods? Guy Sure surveyed the space below. At this moment, the figure akin to the divine god stepped out. He held a golden divine spear in his palm, radiating endless divine light. Feeling the war intent upon Guy Sure, the other strong cultivators were also equally aggressive. Although their hearts were not quite at peace, they were not too concerned. Even if Yi Futian broke through the realm, he would be at the same level as them. So there was nothing to fear. Boom! A dull bang sounded between heaven and earth as the golden divine light pierced the sky. The divine god's spear jabbed down again straight at Yi Futian. Those who had attacked before now released the might of the way at the same time, intending to take down Yi Futian directly and end the fight. Although they were still unafraid, Yi Futian was already extremely tyrannical, while in the realm of unblemished. Now that he had proved himself worthy of nirvana, he would only be getting stronger. There might be a chance to be chased out in front of the divine tree. Yi Futian glanced up at the sky above, and all swords became one. They turned into one sword and drove toward the golden divine spear that fell from the void. The two collided and made a dull sound. Countless air currents of swordsmanship flowed from that sword and rolled upward, destroying all might of the way. Around Yi Futian's body, there was a storm of swordsmanship, as if using the sword method of the fleeting divine sword in defense, rather than attack. For a time, the stars around his body were in the turbulence of the swordsmanship, and all the invading methods were broken, unable to approach him by even half a step. Junior sister Luoyue watched closely. Wan Shui released his divine will as he stared at the sky above, wanting to perceive Yi Futian's sword clearly. The fleeting years in the divine will from Lord Taishian was too strong and distant from them. Its realm was too high. Hence, it was difficult to understand. It required the ability to comprehend to capture its essence. However, Yi Futian was in the same realm as them, but his comprehension of swordsmanship was far superior. Now that he was releasing the sword method in front of them, naturally, they were giving it their full attention. Yi Futian's swordsmanship could teach them a lot, and they should take this opportunity to learn. Luoyue's expression was grave and nodded seriously, staring at the void above like Wan Shui. Even back when they were in the realm of ruin at Taishian City, Yi Futian had left a deep impression on her. Today, it was even more so. The divine sword in the air collided with the golden divine spear. The sword will of the great path flowed, and his body was wrapped up by the sword screen. Yi Futian looked up at the mountain of the way and said, "If you guys don't want to come down, I have to invite you down here." As his voice fell, around his body, there was a sword breaking through the air. It escaped into the space of the void in an instant. Then there was the second sword, the third, and many, many more. Countless divine swords shuttled through in the void, and everyone looked up. It was filled with the shadows of swords. Did he want to bury the sky with swords? What a strong divine will! Yaya also looked up at the scene in the void, and her heart was greatly shaken. Of course, she did not doubt Yi Futian's strength. He had been improving ever since those years at the Holy Ji Palace, constantly surpassing people who were stronger than him. Knives sharpened knives. Along with his opponents, his world became broader, stronger. He would never fall behind. The realm of nirvana was the focal point of the divine path, but it was also the foundation on which the divine wheel of the great path was based. Yi Futian broke through to the realm of nirvana, which meant that his heart and his mind could both accommodate a wider world, such as his controlling countless divine swords in space, where each sword had its own trajectory of the great path and brewed swordsmanship within. Even for her, with her foundation firmly rooted in nirvana realm, it was still difficult to achieve. The sword of Taishan Mountain, the fleeting divine sword, pleased to meet you. As Yi Futian's voice fell, countless divine swords descended. In this instant, everyone who was on the divine tree at the top of the mountain saw the currents of swordsmanship coming toward them, closing in for the kill. They looked up and watched the coming swords with incredibly unpleasant countenances. He was controlling the swords through the air and releasing the fleeing divine sword. The temperature around Lu Qingyao's body dropped again, and frost covered the world. It intended to stop all the forces in the surrounding space, but when the sword passed, it left a sword mark, and this was only the first sword mark. A squealing noise came out, and sword marks crisscrossed, appearing around her body. The swordsmanship penetrated her methods, and more sword marks came through the void, cutting through all methods. This was the cleave of all things. However, this sword had not stopped its attack. Gradually, the entire space was about to be annihilated and smashed, burying everything. Wherever the sword passed, everything turned to dust. Lu Qingyao's face was pale. She was furiously resisting this force, but proud as she might be, she felt a sense of powerlessness as the destructive sword qi left a bloodstain on her, turning her white robe red. Not only was Lu Qingyao being attacked by the fleeting divine sword, but Chang Fenglai of the Changfeng family, Qin Zong of the Sky-Burying God clan, and the disciples of the divine palace were all attacked mercilessly by the swordsmanship. Before, he was forcing his way onto the mountain. This time, Yi Futian was putting everyone under his sword at the same time. At this moment, all the strong cultivators were experiencing the swordsmanship of Taishan Mountain at the same time. The fleeting divine sword. Fleeting years, Wan Shuyi stared into the void. This sword had already surpassed the limit of cleave of all things, and entered the level of fleeting years. As the sword was unleashed, none of the cultivators had time to care for the others. They were busy defending against his sword. Pissed, Lu Qingyao was the weakest of them all. Before, in the battle fighting for the life spring, she was already defeated. Now, how could she be Yi Futian's opponent when he had stepped into the nirvana realm? Under the fleeting divine sword, she couldn't bear such an attack. As blood stained her white clothing, this direct disciple of the divine palace, like a withered flower, shook in the rain and wind under his swordsmanship. Finally, with a soft groan, she was unable to fight any longer. As swords descended and landed around her body, each and every one of these swords had the chance to kill her. How awful! Many were sympathetic in their hearts. Yi Futian was seriously ruthless. He showed no mercy at all. This sword strike was brutal. Lu Qingyao was a direct disciple. Such a devastating loss under the divine sword was truly embarrassing for her. Of course, it was not just her. Even Chang Fenglai and Qin Zong also felt great pressure. Though Yi Futian was controlling the sword remotely, it seemed that the attack each person suffered was released directly by him. In front of Qin Zong, countless stone tablets appeared, and the will of the way inside the tablets suppressed the heavens. Still, there were infinite divine swords flowing between heaven and earth, continuously pulverizing the stone tablets around him, until he was completely vanquished. It's already done. When the people below saw this, they could feel that Yi Futian's fleeting divine sword was now perfected. While he was still fighting with Gai Shishir in person, his sword everywhere launching attacks on everyone, challenging all the cultivators with his raw strength alone. He had just entered Nirvana realm. Could he already be invincible in Nirvana? These were people who had already stood at the top level of Nirvana. Li Sun and Bai Xiu both withdrew early, unable to fight anymore. Under the long river of his swordsmanship, it was hard for the others to continue. There were golden divine lights all around Gai Shishir's body, and that godlike figure regarded Yi Futian below. While fighting with him, he didn't concentrate on the fight at hand, but was also attacking all the other cultivators. It was incredibly arrogant and fully demonstrated his conceit. However, the strength of this swordsmanship, even he had to recognize and acknowledge this prowess. This musician from Taishan Mountain seemed to have received the true arts of Lord Taishan, and his swordsmanship was the first among this generation on Taishan Mountain. He was far ahead of all the others. Bang! The golden spear in his hand burst and shattered inch by inch, and the golden divine light shot through the void. Gai Shirshi's expression was still extremely dominant. Seeing the sword will roll towards him, the golden divine blood inside him roiled and howled, and the divine god's body, that was formed from gold, was releasing a dazzling divine light, which was able to counter the sword will. Gai Shirshir was forming the seal with both of his hands, and a curious sound seemed to be heard from above the sky, and there seemed to be the sound of the great path that chimed non-stop in the sky. Above the sky, indomitable ancient gods appeared with mighty power. They descended at the same time, appearing around Gai Shirshir. Suddenly, in the sky above Yi Futian, a divine mansion seemed to hover there. Summon the ancient golden god. Everyone looked up in the sky, their hearts trembling violently. How strong! Gai Shirshir was truly deserving of his reputation. This superb genius from the golden divine nation showed unparalleled combat power, which had not been fully unleashed before. Until this moment, Yi Futian finally forced out his full strength. Yi Futian's sword had already defeated several people. The other genius talents in the void were unable to contend with Yi Futian's sword, but Gai Shirshir now wanted to launch a counterattack to suppress Yi Futian. In comparison, their levels were revealed instantly. The ancient golden god descended from heaven. It is the sigh of the divine god. When Shuyi focused on the void, his expression changed slightly. This method was the supreme way of the golden divine nation, and was the highest form of magic. It was rumored to be an inheritance left over from the times of the ancient gods. Under the sigh of the gods, even the gods would perish, and it was extremely difficult to cultivate. Had Gai Shirshir completed the cultivation of the sigh of the divine god? Unexpectedly, Gai Shirshir is already at such a powerful level. Others also exclaimed. Today, they were actually witnessing a showdown here. Even among future direct disciples of the divine palace, these two were the stuff of legends. Yi Futian also felt the mighty power of the will of the way that came from the void at this time. The god of the great path appeared, and the pressure of might descended to suppress all. The breath that erupted out from Gai Shirshir, at this moment, was many times greater than before, and seemed to be another transformation. Gai Shirshir's strength has already set him apart from all the other direct disciples, and they are no longer one the same level. Yi Futian remarked to himself as he felt this power. Ultimately, Gai Shirshir should be at the same level as those who automatically received the quota for the fruits of the way, like the crown prince Yi Tianyu of the heavenly mandate dynasty. Yi Tianyu was certainly not stronger than Gai Shirshir. The momentum inside Yi Futian's body was getting more magnificent, and above his body, a stronger sword will swept out and flowed to the sword of heaven and earth. Bang! There was a violent noise that came from the void. Chang Fengyi's body was penetrated by the sword. He was bloody all over, his breath was weak, and Qin Zong likewise was also injured gravely by the sword. In front of the divine tree of comprehension, all the genius talents fell one after another under Yi Futian's sword. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. At that moment, the most powerful direct disciple in front of the divine tree of comprehension was the one who had previously let Lu Qingyao go up. His power was extraordinary. He had resisted the fleeting divine sword for the longest time, but in the end, he had been similarly unable to block the killing sword. At that moment, the most powerful direct disciple in front of the divine tree of comprehension was the one who had previously let Lu Qingyao go up. His power was extraordinary. He had resisted the fleeting divine sword for the longest time, but in the end, he had been similarly unable to block the killing sword. Yi Futian was still down below. His sword will filled the sky as it flowed all through the vast area. Everyone except for Gai Shirshir of the Golden Divine Nation had already fallen, and they had no more power to fight. Some of them had directly tried to seize the fruit of the way, but they had been pierced by Yi Futian's sword, leaving shocking sword slashes on their bodies. They had been wounded internally, but they would recover in a short time. The sword will completely covered the divine tree of comprehension, leaving the people below him as shocked as could be. He was trying to take the whole tree for himself, and not let anyone else take from it. Even the top figures were not allowed to, not even the personal disciples of the divine palace. He is so arrogant, they all said to themselves. But Yi Futian had the right to be. The power he had displayed had been simply frightening, and now, there was only one person still capable of fighting. If Gai Shirshir could not beat him, then no one could. Figures of imposing deities appeared up in the sky. It was as if the gods were truly coming down from the heavens and crushing everything below them. A burst of pressure from the great path covered Yi Futian. The gods seemed to be singing, making it seem like this area of the sky would be crushed by golden power. Gai Shirshir's aura surged. At that moment, there were few at the nirvana level who could match him. His law body was so powerful that even a forged Renhuang body would probably not be as good. The sword will was suppressed. Gai Shirshir held a golden divine spear. And it was not just him, but all of the figures of gods gripped divine spears as well. They chanted and destruction followed. It seemed that there was no one in the world who could stop Gai Shirshir. Even Yi Futian, with his incomparable talent, would have to bow before the chanting of these gods. The golden light seemed to form a celestial curtain. It covered Yi Futian when it fell, making it so that he could not escape. The endless golden light seemed to be formed of golden spears that spanned the sky. At the same time, Gai Shirshir finally moved. The gods thrust their spears downwards. Their chanting rang out. Everything was destroyed wherever the sound went, and nothing was left. His will is so strong, even a nirvana-level cultivator would not be able to withstand a single attack. Although the people watching the battle from below were outside the range of the attack, they could still feel the killing power and shocking will within it. It was far beyond the limits of what they could withstand. There were even nirvana-level cultivators within them, but they thought that even they would be killed by that attack. They would die from a single strike. That swordsman from Taishian Mountain had Lord Taishuan's fleeting divine sword. Could he the chanting of the gods and the attack from their spears? Yi Futian stood in the air, his body resonating with the great path. His world tree swayed, and the will that he had previously absorbed burst forth violently, integrating itself into his sword. A huge divine furnace seemed to appear within him, refining all the will of the great path. But those watching could not see it very clearly, due to the golden light enveloping him. Gai Shirshir was no weaker than Yin Tianyu, the prince of the heavenly mandate dynasty. At that moment, Yi Futian was feeling the pressure of the twin attacks of the gods chanting and their spears. The gods chanting was particularly difficult to bear, as it increased the power of Gai Shirshir's aura and the heavenly great path by several orders of magnitude. He had to take this seriously. He reached out, seeming to hold up the very sky with his hands. Suddenly brilliant flashing divine swords appeared in his hand. Each one contained sky-breaking sword will. When he saw the spears coming towards him, he formed a sword seal. His divine spiritual sorcery flowed, and his sword slashed out. The sword shrieks pierced everyone's ears, and then became softer until there was no sound at all. It seemed as if they had gone beyond the limits of sound. The spears collided with the fleeting divine swords. But all the people watching from below could see was a flash of destructive light. Everything was shattered into dust, and the great path flowed backward. They saw the divine spears that had been formed of golden radiance, and the swords that had been formed out of spiritual sorcery shatter into nothingness and disappeared. Was their power evenly matched? Time seemed to stop as everyone's eyes were on the battlefield. Something was wrong. The battle had not stopped yet. Everyone's hearts were pounding as they gazed fixedly into the sky. Although the swords had been destroyed, the burst of sword will was still there. The great path was flowing in reverse, and the river of stars was rotating. Everything had been turned to dust under the destructive power of the river of the great path. But the dust was moving towards Gai Shirshir, and trying to swallow him up. Gai Shirshir was a proud man. When he saw that his attack had been destroyed, and the energy from his opponent's attack was still sweeping towards him, his face turned dark. Brilliant golden light flashed from him as the power spread towards him. A shrill sound rang out as it swept over Gai Shirshir's body, and then disappeared into nothingness. The fighting will that Gai Shirshir had used as armor had already been destroyed, and now blood was flowing from his golden body. But the blood was glowing with golden light, as if it was the ichor of a god. Golden blood! Everyone's hearts trembled fiercely. It seemed that the legends were true. The people of the Golden Divine Nation were descendants of the old gods, and golden blood flowed through the old gods' veins. And now they were seeing that golden blood with their own eyes. What was frightening was that Gai Shirshir had already started to forge his body of the great path. His bones, veins, and organs were all transforming, but even so he had still been wounded in this battle. The two figures were standing in the air. One of them had an arrogant expression on his face, his white robes flapping in the wind. He looked up into the sky. The mountain was covered with people that he had wounded in this battle. None of them could withstand his swords. The other person's golden robes were stained with blood. Golden light still shone from his eyes, but it was not as brilliant and imposing as before. He had the bold manner of someone who was unparalleled in heaven and earth. But at this moment, he seemed a little dazed. Gai Shirshir had not thought that he would ever be defeated before he entered the Divine Palace. He had thought that his opponent would be one of the people from the Divine Palace. Previously, he had not given a second thought to Futian. Even if his opponent had reached the Nirvana level, he still would have been confident in his victory. He had the blood of the golden old gods, and the chanting of the gods. How could he lose? But his spears were not as sharp as his opponent's swords. The one whom Lord Taishian had chosen had beaten him. Futian swept his gaze over Gai Shirshir, and then stepped forward, shooting towards the mountain like a beam of sword light. He paid no more mind to Gai Shirshir. Everyone was speechless as they saw Futian head towards the mountain. This man had crushed the proud son of heaven of the higher heavens realm, and then had ascended to the peak of the mountain of the way. Who would have thought that a musician from Taishian Mountain would be the one to defeat all opponents? Even the proud cultivators from all over the higher heavens realm could not compete with him. Not even the disciples of the Divine Palace. Perhaps only those few personal disciples of the Divine Palace who had not come were qualified to fight him. But based on his battle with Gai Shirshir, there would probably even be very few of them who could withstand the fleeting divine sword. There were probably incredibly few people who were powerful enough to fight him. Wait for me to finish my cultivation, then you can fight again. Futian swept his gaze over all the people he had defeated. They were all speechless. They were all losers. What could they say? This tree can accommodate many cultivators. You can't take up all those places by yourself, even if you take all the fruit of the way. The wounded Lu Qingyao had used her life will to heal her injuries. She looked at Futian as she spoke. She wanted to stay here in order to understand more. Previously, none of you were willing to save a place for me, answered Futian. He looked down at Yaya and Wan Shuyi and said, "Come on up." Yaya nodded and flashed up into the air. Wan Shuyi, Luoyue, and the others came up as well, heading towards the divine tree of comprehension. Seeing that Wan Shuyi and Luoyue were getting a chance to cultivate at the divine tree of comprehension, Junmu and the others felt conflicted. Li Jin felt a little bit regretful. Who would have thought that the musician from Taishian Mountain, Xinjing, would have the strength to crush all the proud sons of heaven from the higher heavens realm? You are cultivators of Taishian Mountain, so you may come up as well, said Futian to Li Jin and Chunyu. The two of them were stunned. They looked up at Futian in the air. When they saw his eyes, they felt a little bit ashamed. Futian nodded at Ma Yi. "Brother Ma Yi," he said. Ma Yi suddenly lowered his head, feeling ashamed as well. They flashed over to the divine tree of comprehension. Li Jin looked at Futian and said, "Why are you doing this? The little bit of friction between us is no need for enmity. We all came here from Taishian Mountain. There are plenty of places for all of us, so this is no great matter," answered Futian. The great path itself flowed through saints, making them one with heaven and earth. These little misunderstandings were not worth remembering. When one set their heart on the heavenly great path, none of the pettiness of the mortal world should remain. We were too narrow-minded, said Li Jin with a bow towards Yi Futian. She felt that ever since Yi Futian had come to Taishan Mountain, she had always been skeptical of his being able to get into String Palace. These narrow-minded thoughts had indeed affected their cultivation. This was probably why her Guqin and the people from Sword Abyss's swords were not as good as Yi Futian's. If you could disregard our previous transgressions, we would blush from shame, said Junmu as he took a step forward. He wanted to come up as well. Whoosh! A burst of sword will descended suddenly, stopping Junmu in his tracks. He looked up into the air. I'm sorry, there is no place for you here, said Yi Futian coldly. Cultivators had big hearts, but there were some things that they could not forgive. Junmu's face darkened. Seeing that everyone was looking at him, he cast a cold glance at Yi Futian, and then turned and left. Junmu will hate you for that, Wan Shuyi transmitted to Yi Futian. But Yi Futian did not care. What could a Nirvana-level cultivator do to him? Let us cultivate. Yi Futian looked at the giant tree before him. He walked forward towards the center of the tree, making Wan Shuyi look surprised. There were many pieces of fruit on the tree, and all were full of the essence of heaven and earth. They could produce will in people that would resonate with the great path. That was why in the past, so many people had plucked this fruit, in order to aid their comprehension. So why was Yi Futian walking towards the center of the tree? If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Yi Futian walked up to the towering tree, and looked up at it. He could feel many different types of will in this place. Yi Futian walked up to the towering tree and looked up at it. He could feel many different types of will in this place. The tree made him think of the world tree within him, his life spirit, that could also hold all kinds of will of the great path. Could there be some kind of connection between them? It was probably just a coincidence. The world tree was his life spirit, and this tree was a divine thing in the middle of the sea of the path. It bore fruit of the way that could be used to comprehend the great path. He swept his gaze over the trunk of the mighty tree. As his eyes traveled downward, he saw that it seemed to be rooted in the mountain of the way. Its countless roots stretched out in all directions. This is the divine tree of comprehension. We can use it to comprehend the will of the great path much more efficiently, Yi Futian said to himself. He sat down cross-legged beneath the tree, and did not bother to form a resonance with any of the pieces of fruit on it. He closed his eyes and cast away all distracting thoughts. He did not think about anything in the outside world, but sank deep within himself, immersing himself in a mystical plane. He seemed to forget himself. Although his eyes were shut tightly, he could see more clearly than if his eyes had been open. His divine spirit covered a boundless area, and there was nowhere where he was not present. He could sense everything. A crisp wind blew by, seeming to contain the way within it. He sensed a fiery piece of fruit of the way. His divine spirit entered into it, and in a flash, he could feel blazing flames burning in the sky. It seemed that these flames reached up to the heavens, and they burned his divine spirit. He also felt a piece of lightning fruit. He suddenly felt like he was in a world of lightning, and he was bathed in the great path of thunder. He felt many other kinds of will. Every piece of fruit on the tree contained a frightening amount of the will of the great path. The people from Taishan Mountain were all there as well. They could sense the will contained within the fruit of the way. They sat there, sensing the world around them quietly. Will flowed over all of their bodies, except for Yi Futian's. Below them, everyone was looking up into the air. Many of them had their eyes closed, and were using their other senses. Although Yi Futian had expelled the people who had been here previously, he had not forced them to leave. They could still sense the will of the tree from below the mountain, and thus it was still beneficial to their cultivation. Yi Futian sat there quietly, as if he could sense the world more clearly now. As time passed, Yi Futian sank deeper into himself, until he felt like he had turned into a tree himself. The tree had worked its way into his very veins. The world tree was spreading through him, and different kinds of will flowed on every one of its trunks. The will of the great path was very potent there, and it burned like the sun in the sky. Brilliant light gradually began to shine from him, and a powerful force began to spread out from his body. The will resonated with the divine tree of comprehension, and suddenly lines of will were flowing from the tree towards him. They penetrated him. With a thought, Futian formed sword will within himself. All of the will of the divine tree of comprehension within him turned into sword will that flowed to every part of his body. To become a Renhuang, one had to forge a Renhuang body, comprehend a Renhuang soul, and form a wheel of the great path. As Futian thought of this, endless sword will flowed through his veins, and even into his bones and organs. Outside, sword will was also flowing down from the divine tree of comprehension and over Futian's body. His entire body was soon covered in sword will. Below, some people looked up at him. There was so much sword will. Was Futian trying to forge a body of swordsmanship? Futian was bathed in sword will. The current of sword will was growing stronger and stronger as it went into him, until it formed a closed loop. It would not flow out of him. It seemed like all of this powerful sword will was locked up within him. When one formed a law body and a law soul, one was on the inside, and the other was on the outside. The law body was internal, and the law soul was external. Once the two had been forged, they would resonate, and only then could one form forge the wheel of the great path. Know everything under heaven, shine with the sun and the moon, and have one's every movement be in accordance with the way. This was a place to prove one's worthiness. It gave people a much better chance to become a Renhuang. Everything that Futian did here was something that many people would fight to have a chance to do. Wan Shui and Luoyue seemed to feel something. They opened their eyes and saw that endless sword will was falling from the divine tree of comprehension and entering Futian's body. This distressed them greatly. This genius was truly unpredictable. Futian's need for will was terrifying, but the will contained within the divine tree of comprehension seemed to be endless. As time passed, Futian's body seemed to be translating into a body of swordsmanship. Everything about him seemed to be made of sword will both inside and out. Can he really comprehend this much, even without using any of the fruit of the way? Everyone asked themselves. This Futian was frighteningly talented. After a while, Futian had completely transformed into a sword that was sitting there with his eyes closed. Shenjing seems to be forming a law body, said the people who were watching him from below. This is a rare opportunity, so naturally he must seize it. Let us also continue to comprehend the way, said someone, and he closed his eyes. After a few days, Futian's body was like the blazing sun. The air around him seemed to be burning. He shone in all directions, making a look of surprise come over everyone's faces. But most of them were immersed in their own cultivation, and so they did not pay him too much heed. In what seemed like the blink of an eye, Futian and all the others had been cultivating at the Mountain of the Way for more than 2 months. During this whole time, Futian had not risen once. He was completely immersed in a state of self-forgetfulness. He could sense that there was far more to this tree than even he could see. At this moment, he was in a mystical state, and he could sense that the tree connected the whole mountain together. Its roots reached to every corner of the mountain, and it was not just the Mountain of the Way. They reached to the entire mountain range. This tree's roots connected the entire area. The tree was truly massive. All of the trees in the area were really one. At that moment, a brilliant light shone from the palace at the peak of the mountain. Everyone looked up at it. Some of them did not understand, but the disciples of the divine palace knew that the time had come. The dawn light of the great path spread out, covering the entire area and enveloping the Mountain of the Way within it. Futian ceased his cultivation and opened his eyes. He looked towards the palace and saw that it was as mystical as an illusion. It gave off a sense of unreality. He guessed that it was probably an image of the divine palace. A burst of marvelous energy descended. A voice rang through the air. "Time is up. Prepare to leave," came the faint voice from the palace. Futian stood up immediately. With a single thought, all of his swords shot through the air, cutting down all the giant pieces of fruit on the tree, then bringing them to him. When they saw this, the people of Taishan Mountain stopped cultivating and looked at Futian. They were already perfectly satisfied with the amount of will they had been able to comprehend, and it was all thanks to the fact that Futian had not blamed them for their transgressions against him. They may have had vain hopes to get more of the fruit, but now, Futian had taken them all. They felt a bit disappointed by this, but it was only right and proper. The fruit on this tree was incredibly valuable. It was said that a single piece of fruit was enough to support a cultivator in forging a law body and forming a wheel of the great path. If you used one when you were at the peak of the Nirvana plane, it could help you break through to the next level. He could not lightly give up any of this fruit, even for the sake of his friendship with Taishan Mountain. Little Phoenix looked piteously at Futian. Was he really so heartless? We have been here cultivating for so long that I will give you 2 more pieces of fruit to help you reach Nirvana. Futian waved his hand, and 2 pieces of fruit flew over to Little Phoenix, a flame fruit and a life fruit. Both were ones she had gotten before, and had not come from the divine tree of comprehension. So petty, whispered Little Phoenix as she took them. If you don't want them, give them back. Futian stared at her. Fengyang put the fruit in her mouth as quickly as possible. Give them back. How could she do that? Everyone watching envied Little Phoenix a little bit. Futian had not even thought of them. He had already done everything he needed to do. If they were not happy with him, was there anything they could really say? The light that covered the area grew brighter and brighter. There was a roar in the sky as another powerful beam of light shot out from the palace, swallowing up all the cultivators. In the next instant, everyone could feel the stars revolving as the scene before their eyes changed completely. Futian was stunned. He looked around him and saw the endless sea of the path. Everyone was there. The mountain, the tree, and the whole land had disappeared abruptly. It was like it had all been a dream that had never happened. There was a crashing sound in front of them, and a huge demonic beast broke through the waves, then floated on the surface of the water. It was the black turtle that had brought them here before. He looked at everyone and said, "Come with me." On saying this, he turned and continued on through the sea. Everyone formed boats and followed him. Along the way, Futian could feel many eyes on him. Men of talent always aroused the envy of others. Moreover, he now had all the fruit of the divine tree. It was obvious that he would attract a lot of attention. If they were not in the Sea of the Way, but rather at the divine palace, he would probably have a fight on his hands right about now. Once they had left, there were no more rules to entangle them. People could even use Runhuang implements. And everyone there was extraordinarily powerful, and had some impressive ritual implements. Are we going to the divine palace? Futian asked Wan Shuyi. Wan Shuyi nodded. Yes. Don't you want to go and see such a legendary place? Futian looked off into the distance. Far away, he could faintly see a celestial palace. It was just like before. It seemed both like a reflection in the water and real at the same time. We will be there soon. Ahead of them, the black turtle sped up, flying over the waves. He was heading towards the place that Futian was looking at. Everyone else saw it as well. Other than the disciples of the divine palace, everyone else was curious. They all had their own expectations about it. Of course I do, answered Futian with a smile at Wan Shuyi. He wanted to take a trip to the divine palace. As they got closer, they could already see a mystical island rising out of the Sea of the Way. This was the place where the premier holy land for cultivating in the higher heavens realm, the Shangxiao Divine Palace, was. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. As everyone got closer, they realized that the mystical island that rose up out of the Sea of the Way was quite vast. As everyone got closer, they realized that the mystical island that rose up out of the Sea of the Way was quite vast. Everyone was looking forward with solemn expressions on their faces as the boats flew across the water. We are here, they all thought to themselves. The black turtle slowly sank back down to the depths of the sea. Everyone's figures flashed as they shot through the air and landed on the island. Futian and the others landed on the island as well. The air around them was thick with the aura of the great path, and the vast island was covered with will. There were several figures waiting on the shore. They were a few messengers who had come to welcome them. When they saw the cultivators coming, one of them said, "Those of you who passed the Sea of the Way entrance examination should familiarize yourselves with the Divine Palace. A bell will ring tomorrow, and when it does, you should all join together. Someone will be there to lead you in your cultivation. Those others among you who were part of the quota may stay in the Divine Palace to cultivate if you wish. If you do not wish to do this, you may leave whenever you want." Previously, many people had fought for the right to be part of the quota, to go to the land of proving the way, and thus had undergone a test at the Divine Palace. Those who were successful were already considered disciples of the Divine Palace. As for the people from the other top forces, and the geniuses from throughout the higher heavens realm, if they wished to stay and become an ordinary disciple of the Divine Palace, it would naturally be quite easy. As for whether or not they could become a personal disciple, that would depend on their performance at the palace. "For the time being, you all may do as you please," continued the messenger, and upon saying so, they all turned and left, surprising all of those who had just arrived. Was the Divine Palace really so casual? "Does this mean that they don't care about us?" someone whispered. "The Divine Palace truly did things in a unique way. Aren't they worried that we will cause a disturbance?" someone asked. "Once you enter the Divine Palace, you are not forbidden from going anywhere. But that is because you are expected to take responsibility for whatever happens wherever you go. The Divine Palace is not responsible for whether you live or die," transmitted one of the personal disciples of the Divine Palace coldly. This was the Divine Palace, and there were not too many rules. As long as the place you wanted to go was somewhere that you were able to get to, you were allowed to go there. If something happened to you, the Divine Palace would not care. "This sounds like the Divine Palace, all right. They are very willful," whispered Luoyue. "Do you think that our actions here can escape the notice of the people of the Divine Palace?" said Yi Futian with a smile. Luoyue nodded and said, "You are right. There were many people of high levels in the Divine Palace. Their thoughts covered the entire place. No matter what they did, there was no way they could hide it from these high-level figures." The messengers who had come to greet them had left, and the disciples of the Divine Palace flashed away one by one as well, each returning to their places of cultivation. "Let's go," said Yi Futian. They stepped forward into the Divine Palace. There were many mountains of the way all over the island, and there were celestial figures flying towards the mountains. All of them were of the saint level or higher. As they went inward, they saw that there were places for cultivation in between the rolling mountains. Their palaces on the tops of mountains, and in the valleys. As for cavern residences and blessed places, they seemed endless. The air was thick with will. These places were all places where the people of the Divine Palace could cultivate. Those temples and palaces were naturally places where the great figures of the palace could teach the way. And the cavern residences and blessed places were places where the disciples could train. Yi Futian discovered that many people were following him. In addition to the disciples of Taishan Mountain, many of the other people were staring at him. At that moment, he had many of the incredible precious pieces of fruit of the way. He was an easy target for people's greed. It was absolutely impossible that none of these powerful saints wanted to rob him of them. Moreover, it seemed that the Divine Palace would place no restraints on them doing so. "They seem to be following you," Wan Shuyi transmitted to Yi Futian. "Let them," replied Yi Futian. He naturally knew what they were thinking. If they tried to steal his fruit of the way, he would not be polite at all. He stopped and said to everyone, "We are in the Divine Palace now. Everyone should go and see if you can find a chance to reach the Great Path. I will wander around here as well. There is no need for us to go together, so we should split up." The previous events had made the others from Taishan Mountain look at him as their leader. They were all following him, which made him a bit uncomfortable. Moreover, if a huge battle broke out, the disciples of Taishan Mountain were all of a lower level, and it would be hard for them to defend themselves, so it was better not to let them get involved. "But you," Li Jin looked all around them. She could naturally see all the people staring at Yi Futian. "I will be fine. I was able to take care of myself at the Mountain of the Way. There is no one here at the Divine Palace who can touch me," said Yi Futian confidently. Li Jin was used to Yi Futian by now. Given the power that he had displayed, it was indeed true that few people could threaten him. Fine, then we will split up, said Li Jin with a nod. They all went in different directions. You should go too, said Yi Futian to Wan Shuyi and Luo Yue. He had helped them as much as he could on this journey. He had used his song to empower Wan Shuyi's sword. The next time he fought, he would have to rely on himself. Very well, said Wan Shuyi with a nod of his head, and he left as well. Yaya turned and prepared to leave, which shocked Yi Futian. You are leaving as well? Yaya nodded. Yes. I am going to spend some time here cultivating. All right. Yi Futian knew why Yaya was doing this. Although she had not attracted much attention in the past, it was not certain that no one had been watching her. There was nothing out of the ordinary about her and Xin Jing knowing each other. After all, it was unlikely that she would not know anyone in the higher heavens realm. But if she were always spending her time with Yi Futian, it would be impossible to avoid drawing attention. And what about you? What are you going to do here? Yi Futian asked Little Phoenix. I am going to do my own thing. What does that have to do with you? Pouted Little Phoenix. She would not admit that she had been following Yi Futian. I'll travel with you once I get back. Until then, go off and play, said Yi Futian with a smile. Little Phoenix stared at him. Did this guy take her for a child? If you're going to go, then go. Little Phoenix spread her wings and flashed away, leaving Yi Futian alone. If someone really attacked him, then having Feng Yin by his side would be a burden. Now that he was left alone, he could relax a little. He could do whatever he wanted. He continued forward. He sensed an aura off in the distance and said, If you want to steal these from me, then just try it. Why hide? You don't want to shame old demon Luo. When he said this, a burst of mighty demonic energy filled the air. A group of figures appeared in the sky above him. It was indeed Luo Yuming, and the others from the divine capital of Xiling. He had been wounded by Yi Futian at the Mountain of the Way, and he had spent all this time healing. It was obvious how much bitterness he felt towards Yi Futian. The trip to the land of proving the way was over, and Yi Futian was the only one who had many pieces of fruit of the way, and his fruit was the most precious. How could Luo Yuming not be greedy? The will that burst forth from Luo Yuming was terrible. Endless death will swept out, covering the space below him where Yi Futian was. The other cultivators from the divine capital of Xiling beside him prepared to attack as well. They blocked off all the different directions in the air above Yi Futian. You made everyone else leave. You're not scared that I would attack the people from Taishan Mountain, are you? Luo Yuming's eyes were cold, and his voice was full of killing intent. If you can take the fruit from my hands through trickery or artifice, do you think that you and the divine capital of Xiling will be able to withstand Lord Taishuan's wrath? Said Yi Futian coldly. Right now, Lord Taishan dominated the higher heavens realm. The old demon of Xiling had been defeated by him. If he wanted to attack the divine capital of Xiling, who could stop him? The strength of the elders was the greatest protection for the younger generations. Right now, the disciples of Taishan Mountain were a little bit weak, but no one would dare to harm them. A strand of sovereign power appeared upon Luo Yuming. He obviously knew that he was no match for Yi Futian in terms of combat ability. If he wanted to seize the fruit, he would have to use the power of his ritual instrument. Boom! Someone suddenly launched an attack. Death spears pierced through the air, rushing towards Yi Futian. You must have a death wish. Yi Futian swept his gaze through the air, and suddenly, sword will filled the sky. The death spears were immediately destroyed, and the sword will continued onward, leaving sword slashes in the air. Poof! Sword light pieced through the air, and slash marks appeared on the demonic cultivator. Blood spurted from his head as he stared at Yi Futian below them. Then, he gradually slackened and fell to the ground below. He had been killed by a single sword stroke. He's gotten stronger. When Luo Yuming felt the power of that sword, his heart trembled. Obviously, cultivating for 2 months, had Yi Futian even stronger than when they had fought. His sword had pierced through the air. A common Nirvana-level cultivator was no match for him at all. Moreover, Yi Futian had used a killing move right away. This made Luo Yuming, and the other cultivators from the divine capital of Xiling look at him coldly. They could not forget this easily. I know that you have a Runhuang implement, but how do you know that I don't? I don't want to cause any trouble, and I don't like it when other people cause me trouble. If anyone else attacks me they will die, said Yi Futian coldly. He was not only speaking to Luo Yuming, he was reminding everyone who was watching him in secret. It was not good that these people were always thinking about him. So he had executed one as a warning to the rest. Moreover, the man from the divine capital of Xiling had attacked him first, and he had just counterattacked. Although he was only a musician from Taishan Mountain, Lord Taishan had personally mentioned him by name. If an elder came after him due to this matter, he would have to think about how Taishan Mountain would respond. When he heard Yi Futian's unmistakable threat, Luo Yoming's face became livid. Imperial power was still blooming from him. But it was just like Yi Futian had said. He had a Runhuang level ritual implement. But how did he know that Yi Futian did not have one as well? If it really came down to a fight, his opponent would probably not hesitate to kill them. If things were like they had been before, they would not be up to the task. All the rest of you stop following me. Otherwise, my sword will be merciless, said Yi Futian. Everyone watched as he flew through the air, going faster and faster. The sword light cut a swathe through the air as he went off into the distance. A group of figures walked out and watched the retreating figure with cold expressions. But in the end, none of them followed him. Gai Shishir walked out as well, golden divine light flashing on him. This man had offended many of the cultivators of the divine palace. It would be impossible for him to enter the palace without causing a disturbance. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.